All right, so we've got our nail gun set up. We've got our safety glasses. We put on some gloves. It's a little cold out. The wood's got some ragged edges. So we've just gone ahead and put on a little bit of safety gear. We are using a framing nail gun, an air-powered framing nail gun. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to do something with it. Don't point it at people. Don't, lean it against your leg. It's just like a regular firearm. I mean, play very safe with this. You don't want to get shot by a 3.5-inch nail, I can promise you. You could use a hammer and nails. You could use screws. You got to be careful with screws. Screws tend to be very brittle. So if you're using screws, make sure you're using screws that are rated for doing framing. Because if you start getting a little bit of movement in the building, the screws can break and then you'll have failure. So we really like nails. We have the nail gun, so it works really well. What we like to do is start with our second joist in, because it's not right on the end and it's very easy to get lined up and nail. My X is on the other end, so I know this rolls up this way. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that down. And I just basically put this right between the two lines, like that, and I get my top flush. And that's all there is to it. I put 3 nails in each one on a 2x6, 2 on a 2x4. And we're just going to continue this down through. You'll notice that I'm keeping my hand back here, and if I was to shoot like that, you see that nail come out right there? You might not see that on video, but if my hand was up there, that would shoot me in the hand. Makes for a very bad day. You'll notice the carpenter messed up. 7'6", 7'9". So these mistakes can happen. We have a couple ways of solving that. We could rip the whole board out and cut a new board. What we're actually going to do is cut a piece and sister it on and just keep on going. It's not a big deal. It is a storage shed. If this was, $150,000 house, we'd go ahead and change it out. But we will overcome that. But what I want to do is I want to bring you in and show you what we're doing over here. So I think if Sue can come around me, maybe over here on my left. You'll see, I'm going to pull this joist out of the way. You'll see the 2 marks in the X, so we're going to pull that right in between the marks. And we're going to get this lined up. You'll notice it's a little twisted, so what we're going to do is we're going to nail the top first. And then we're going to take the twist out of it and nail the bottom. We're going to do our end one the same way. And if you've got to get your hand in there to hold them like this, I'm going to shoot the bottom first, so I'm away from my hand, you see. And then I get my hand out of the way. And I do want to point out, before we wrap up on this boss stitch we're using has what's called a contact trigger in it. So this comes out of the box with a black trigger and a gray trigger. The black one means that you can just hold your finger on the trigger and repeatedly fire. If you had a gray trigger, you wouldn't be able to do that. Every time you did that, it would do nothing. You have to put it down and pull the trigger. This is generally used in a more fast-paced construction environment where you're repetitively shooting and you don't want to take your finger off the trigger between shots. If you're just kind of a do-it-yourselfer and you're doing smaller projects, leave the gray trigger in there. It's a lot safer. If this happens to bounce, like if you put this down and pull the trigger and it bounces, it can fire another shot. And a lot of times that second shot can go where you don't want it to go. So just kind of a word of caution with the boss stitch nail guns. We're going to go ahead and cut our piece for that real quick and patch that up. And then we're on to squaring this up, nailing it down, and plywooding it. So hold on, I'm going to go cut us a piece that's about 3 feet long. I'll be right back. All right, so we cut ourselves a piece 3 feet long. And we're going to go just on this side of the mark. So remembering that our regular board goes between the mark, we want to stay to this side of the mark altogether. And we're going to shoot that in there. Just like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull these together like this. And we're going to nail them. We're going to line that up, nail it. And we're going to nail from both sides a little bit. There. It's not perfect, but it's more than plenty strong for what we need to do here. So we're going to go ahead and square this up and get it fastened in place so we can get our plywood on. First thing we want to do is pick a side, and we want to get things correct. Remember, we want 2 inches of overhang, and and we have 2 inches right there. We want about 12 inches overhang, and we have 12 inches right there. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to make sure I'm at 12 inches here, and I am. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what we call cross corner measurement. So I'm going to hook right on the very corner over there. And I'm going to measure to this corner. And if you look right there, I have 135 1/4 right to the corner. Now we could use a framing square here, but again, it comes into that accuracy thing. The framing square only goes out 2 feet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook the other corner. I'm going to remember that measurement, and I'm going to check it up here and see what I have and how close I am. In 7/8. So we're going to go, that's 135 3/4 right there. And 135 3/4. So that tells us that we're perfectly square. Now, if this is a really long building, we'd need to put some string lines down through all 4 sides to true the sides up. But as short as this building is, we know it's straight. We're not going to worry about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to pin all 4 corners down. And we're going to go through and nail every joist to the 4x4. And we'll be ready to put on plywood. So I'm going to go ahead and nail that while you guys watch.
Alright, so right about here, the batteries die audio, so you'll notice we're nailing down the other side of the joist, and now we're getting ready to put our plywood on. Sue's helping me lug the plywood here, and what we're going to do is we're going to keep it flush on the face, where you saw my left hand, and we lined it up on the ends. And we know the front is straight just because it's such a short building. Long building, we would have snapped a line, and we would have lined the plywood up with a line. And then what we're doing is we're moving our joists back and forth to center them up on the black lines, which I'll show you a little later. And we're nailing the plywood down about every 8 inches. And you'll notice I keep calling it plywood. It's actually OSB, stands for Oriented Strand Board. I use plywood as a generic term for sheet good, which I shouldn't. And here we're putting the second piece on. You'll notice I go get a hammer and a block of wood. It is tongue and groove. Now I'm trying to drive that in some. I don't drive it up as tight as you could, but here what I'm showing you is the gap between the 2 sheets. You don't want to drive it right up completely tight. If you drive it up completely tight and it gets wet at all, it'll swell up, and then if you're doing it in a house, your flooring will buckle up in that area. So ideally you probably want to leave about 1/8 to, a little over 1/8 of an inch and, of a gap there. I like to nail mine about every 8 to 10 inches, as you see here. What I'm pointing out here is the black lines, and in this case these sheets are marked for 16 on center or 24 on center. The one in the middle right there where my hand is the 24 mark. Those two are the 16-inch marks. So it just makes it a lot easier to nail your sheet good down instead of having to go find a level and make a straight line and whatnot. Like I say, we nail about every 8 inches. You'll notice that I slow down every now and then to let the compressor catch up. My compressor's not very big, and the nail gun will overtake the compressor over time, and the nails won't drive up like you like them to, and you end up having to go back with a hammer. It is something to point out, we'll show you here in a minute, but when you're nailing sheet goods, you don't want the nail to drive halfway through the sheet, especially if you're using like 7/16 OSB on the walls. So on this nail gun, the safety tip is adjustable. So we can adjust the depth of the nail by moving that in or out like that. Farther up like that, it'll drive it really deep. Out like that, it'll drive it real shallow. You can also do it with air pressure. I find this is a little bit more reliable than air pressure. But in a second here, Sue's going to show you, what we want the nail to look like. I want it to be just flush with the surface, or just a little below the surface. Just enough that you don't feel it when you run your hand over it or whatever. It doesn't stick up proud. So what we've got now is the floor is all done. We're going to come back on part 3, and we're going to frame up the walls. We're going to show you how to frame in a door, and then move on from there and get the roof on the thing, and get it dried in. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and come on back and watch part 3.